Najlepša hvala, gospod predsednik. Mr. Speaker, thank you for your inspiring thoughts and your vision of the power of trust. Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest we now begin exploring the incredible power of trust with a short film prepared in cooperation with our partner Pristop, the leading independent marketing and corporate consultancy in the region of Southeast Europe. In accompaniment, we will once again hear the Slovenian Police Orchestra, joined by our guest string section. They will perform Symphony of Trust, a piece written especially for this occasion by the young composer and also a member of BSF team, Mr. Žiga Pirnat. Let us see and hear what trust is about. Please give a big round of applause for the Slovenian Police Orchestra under the baton of Žiga Pirnat. Thank you, Žiga. Thank you, Slovenian Police Orchestra. this year's main panel, entitled The Philosophy of Leadership. Here, we can't but recall the inspiring words of Mahatma Gandhi, who said, I quote, "I suppose leadership at one time meant muscles, but today it means getting along with people," end of quote. The skill in the art of communication and true understanding of people is therefore crucial to a leader's success. It is well known that the real leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. Moreover, the trust of people in their leaders reflects the confidence and the vision of the leaders with regard to the people. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, I would again like to thank you all for coming to Bled. Your knowledge, experience, creative energy are highly valuable and indispensable for the success of this forum. I wish you many creative and open discussions, plenty of innovative thinking, and the most enjoyable stay here in Slovenia. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure that I now hand over the floor to Ms. Manica Janežić-Ambrožić, journalist and a presenter at Television Slovenia, and ask her to invite the panelists of the main panel, The Philosophy of Leadership, to the stage. Let the 2014 Bled Strategic Forum begin.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite our 5 distinguished panelists to come and join me at the podium. Dr. Tibor Navracic, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Hungary. Professor Gamini Lakshman Paris, the Minister of External Affairs of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka. Welcome. General V.K. Singh, Minister of State for Development of Northeastern Region, External Affairs and Overseas Indian Affairs. Mr. Li Zhaoxing, Honorary President of the Chinese People's Institute of Foreign Affairs and former Minister of Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of China. Mr. Li. And let's welcome Mr. Uri Rosenthal, the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Mr. Rosenthal, please. Thank you, gentlemen. We will talk philosophy of leadership shortly, but let me first invite the President of the Republic of Slovenia, Mr. Borut Pahor, to deliver the keynote address. Please, the floor is yours. Mr. President.
Madam Chairperson, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am sometimes asked what makes for excellent political leadership. And I respond with a simple explanation, a very simple sentence. Good political leadership does not adapt to public opinion. Good political leadership shapes it. Now, I do not pretend that this is definition that says all about political leadership, but I think it's good enough. A title such as The Art or The Philosophy of Leadership is justified. It is justified. In the art or philosophy of someone or something, there is always something metaphysical. There is always something inexplicable. There is an added something that can be graced only by intuition. The basic condition for a leader's ability to play a leading role is that they have a clear perception of what they want to achieve and how to do it. The very foundation of political leadership is the will to make a difference. It is not the willingness to adapt to the reality. In this sense, a good political leader does not passively satisfy people's wishes. A good political leader actively shapes their aspirations in accordance with his or her judgment. Yet, to be very clear, this does not mean a political leader may underestimate people, their opinion, or even people themselves. I do strongly believe that a leader ought to understand and respect people. Only then will be able to make them change their views. This ability to make them change their views in their benefit is of the utmost importance for political leadership. In my view, it is primarily a matter of talent, but also of knowledge and skills. Now, what it is important for our debate. Leadership, specifically political leadership, can hardly be debated in a value-neutral way. The fact is, what matters here is what a political leader advocates or fights for. What changes do they champion as leaders? Changes for the better or changes for the worse? And who will benefit from such changes? It makes a great difference whether a political leader campaigns, for example, for peace, or he or she campaigns for the war. And political history has seen both kinds of leaders. In this sense, political leadership is a value system issue par excellence. The system of political democracy, respect for human rights, and the rule of law is intended to avert the danger of political leaders with anti-democratic aspirations. In principle, democratic value system is designated to rule out such a possibility, but no system is a perfect one. So, we shall actively endeavor to awaken genuine humanistic and democratic feelings and aspiration, specifically in young people who demonstrate leadership talents. In this context, Madam Chairperson, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would argue in favor of greater knowledge and more opportunities being offered once again to talented young people. It seems reasonable that we try to educate political leaders who are be able not only to understand the needs for change, but also to realize them for the benefit of the majority of the people. In addition, we have to understand that good political leadership requires self-confidence, a strong, very strong will, critical thinking about the world around us, and an innovative approach. These, of course, are characteristics of critical thinking personalities. Let me finish, Madam Chairperson, by saying that if a democratic society wishes to progress, it has to allow, once again I would point it out, young people to express their opinions and enable the most talented among them to be trained as political leaders, in the hope that they will inspire by the values of peace, security, prosperity, democracy, and human rights. It itself, this brings no certainty. We cannot say this will be so, but it does, however, provide a great opportunity for a brighter future. Thank you so much for your attention.
So we begin with our first panel. Gentlemen, I propose we speak about Europe. There's been an interesting weekend for the European Union with the new leadership elected. Mr. Navracic, you're also the candidate for the Commission. And I'm just wondering, there's been a big debate in European Union in the past years that Union does not have an important place in the world and that the leadership is lacking in Brussels. So my first question would be, Mr. Navracic, do you feel that Brussels should become stronger, and has it with this new leadership?
Can I say otherwise?
Yes, please.
Well, I think there are two types of the leadership from the point of view of the teleology, the aims, the purposes of the activity of a leader. We can distinguish between transactional leaders and transformational leaders. And well, the essence of the activity of a transactional leader is to keep the balance, to follow a policy which can lead to a consolidation in a fluid state, for instance, while the transformational leaders has the advantage to change an exhausted status quo. And my answer depends on how can we define the recent state of the European Union. Because if we say that the EU is in a crisis, in an economic crisis, Europe is in an economic crisis, and we have to consolidate these structures, we have to find a way out from the recent situation, we can say that we need a transactional leader, or we need transactional leaders who can give new rules for the community, who can build up new trusts between the member states, between the Eurozone and the member states outside of the Eurozone. While if we define the EU as a community in crisis in political terms, in its mission, then we can say that we need transformational leaders. Mm-hmm. And I think, looking back to the history of the European integration, the EU, the EC earlier, had plenty of transactional leaders. They tried to keep up the status quo. We simply reached a point where beyond...
That's not enough.
Yes, beyond that point there's
Very
nothing.
simple,
Or
yeah.
there are something absolutely different.
Yeah.
So probably we need...
the Europe will be
transformational
eaten
leaders.
by other superpowers if not more leadership is given to Brussels.
Yeah, well, my favorite definition for the EU is the community of communities. And I think, although it's tricky, but the best days of the EU integration are when national interests and community interests are in harmony. And that's the virtue of the leadership at European level, I think,
Well,
to find
this
the
is
balance between them.
an interesting point, I would say. Mr. Rosenthal, before we were speaking, before this panel, you said that you have interesting information. I'm pretty sure you will not be able to share all of them, but I'm quite interested in how this debate in European Union was going on in the past few weeks, who to choose, how strong a personality to choose, who, why, and I would just like to start a new topic with it. It's quite obvious that the role of European Union in this Ukrainian crisis is weak. Europe is divided about the Ukrainian crisis. On the other hand, we have a very strong leader in Russia. So How do you see this leadership in European Union?
Well, let me first say that I would like to take the opportunity, talking about the prospects for the European Union, to congratulate us all with the appointment, election of the new President of the European Council, the Polish Prime Minister. I think that's a very good step forward in the European Union. That's for one. For the rest, I'm rather restrained in judging what has been going on with regard to the composition of the European Commission, but I'm rather convinced about the fact that everybody understands that the European Union has to step forward in a couple of things. And it has been expressed quite strongly by a commentator who has said that the European Union has up till now been working very much on the small things and not too much on the big things. And there, of course, we are talking about those elements of foreign policy which are, of course, pivotal to the European cause. Let me also add to this that we are here under Chatham House rules, so I can say that my dear colleague here on the panel from China murmured to me, who is your favorite philosopher? And I murmured back in his ears, Aristotle. And why do I mention Aristotle and not so much a guy like Plato, also from the Greek end? Because Aristotle was about checks and balances. And there we are talking, of course, about leadership too. When we think that leadership is just about being strict on things, not listening to others, not listening to the public, not listening also to people in the public at large, then I think that we are on the wrong track. Leadership, according to Aristotle, is a matter of moderate kinds of approaches. And of course, in the pivotal matters, you have to be strong, and if you, for instance, are of the kind that you draw a so-called red line in international politics, you have to keep to them. But for the rest, being up to when it is about leadership, I would say leaders also have to understand again and again the value of checks and balances also on the European end.
Mr. Lee, who is the leader in European Union? Is it based in Brussels, or do they come from Berlin, London, Paris? Who are the leaders in Europe, in your eyes?
Well, to begin with, let me say, Dober dan.
Dobar dan.
For all the friends. Well, this is a very difficult question to answer. But according to my faith, a certain country needs a leader. For example, a kingdom does need a king or a queen. A republic needs a president. Even a business community or an entity needs a general manager or a CEO. And even all a strategic forum needs a chairperson in you. But on international matters, I don't think we need a leader. I always carry the charter of the UN. I carried it and traveled to more than 180 countries. And in the charter, it clearly provided that even the UN, the most important and the biggest international organization, has got no power to intervene into domestic matters of a member state. So how can we assign a leader? Well, to intervene or to exercise leadership over other countries' domestic matters. I believe, philosophically speaking, the true leader, real leader, and eternal leader are the people of related countries. My country fellow, Confucius, who was born in the year 551 before Christ, said, among heaven, earth, and the people are the most important and on the very top. I agree with him. And my leader, a friend who passed away in the early 1970s, New China's second foreign minister, Marshal Chen Yi, wrote a very short poem in the following 4 lines. Are there people on the Mars? Are there people on the moon? There are people on the earth, and therefore the earth is the most precious. So I firmly believe in addressing international affairs, we don't need any country to be the international leader. What we need is to build up trust among ourselves, among different countries. And that is it. The theme, the very important theme of our BLAD Strategic Forum. And I also fully share the slogan shown just now on the screen. With the trust in power, nothing is impossible. So let's work together to make this forum a great success. This will be better than finding a specific country to be our leader. Thank you.
Thank you. General Singh. I'm going to try to compare European Union with India a little bit. It seems that a need for a strong leadership is present in the European Union and in India, and at the same time, these are diverse unions, diverse countries. How do you balance this need for strong leadership on one hand, and on the other hand, a respect for diversity, multiculturalism? How do you do it? What is the good way to do it?
Let me appreciate your comparison, because India with 29 states, a very large population, great amount of diversity in population, resources, religion, philosophy, language. If you're comparing it with European Union, I think to a certain extent we are correct, because there are diverse opinions in the federal structure of India. So when you have to take a national decision, you must take people together. Now when we talk of leadership, there is one thing which I would like to underline. A leader is not the one who arranges things or manages things to do things the right way. Leader is the one who finds the right things to do. Right? And if you are a leader, you will be able to find the right things to do which ensure that you can take the people together. You can shape their opinion by the type of decision you take, because it is your decision in which they will have faith if it impacts the way they live. In democracies, the world around, a leader comes to the fore when he is able to empathize with the people who elect him. If he is able to look at the national interests beyond what are his own personal things which take him forward. A leader must be able to root himself in issues which will be able to get everybody together. And I think that's what European Union needs.
Professor Paris, you're coming from a You're coming from a post-conflict country. You were the chief negotiator for the Sri Lankan government with the Tamil rebels. Sri Lanka today is a country with many qualities, but also Sri Lanka is a country that faces criticism from international organizations concerning human rights. When we talk about leadership in the world, how do you face these critics, especially when they come from the West? Do you feel that the West is sometimes too keen on giving advice?
Well, I think some of the attributes of leadership that were identified by the President of Slovenia in his remarks are directly relevant to that. A leader does not become a success simply by counting heads and deciding where the majority opinion lies. He has a creative function to perform. And as far as countries like Sri Lanka, my own country, are concerned, I think an important ingredient of leadership is the perception that what is being done is morally just, that it is equitable. And when you're talking of attitudes on the part of some countries, including some countries in the European Union, if there is to be moral stature for leadership, then it's absolutely necessary for there to be the conviction that what is done is not driven by political expediency or extraneous motivations. So you look at the country, you look at the situation it is in, you look at all the anguish that it has gone through for a long period, in the case of my country, 30 years, and how it is moving forward now. But if you allow political considerations to cloud your judgment, internal dynamics of the country is concerned, the power of the diaspora, their financial muscle, their organizational capability, then the decisions are not made on criteria which have a moral justification, and that erodes the whole foundation of leadership. I think that is important to bear in mind. And also, I think this point was also made by the President of Slovenia. He said a leader must listen. This means that you must take into account the nuances of a particular situation. There's no size that fits everybody. So if one is dogmatic and one feels that one's own solutions are the solutions for everybody to follow, then again there is a failure of leadership, because a leader should never forget that there are many paths to the summit of a mountain. One's own experience, one's culture, one's traditions may impel one to prefer a particular path. But other people may have different civilizational values and different pragmatic experience. So you have to make allowance for a certain diversity of approach. And the short answer to your question is that the people who are coming up with criticisms of that kind tend to forget that their experience is not the only experience in the world, and the solutions that they purport to prescribe, although they may be appropriate in their own cultural context, may not be a panacea for evils in all other cultures and civilizations.
Mr. Lee, how do you respond to critics from the West when the West is giving advice? And
Well, I don't know what specific criticism you are referring to, anchor person. But for China, we believe philosophically and politically in the people's ideas, in the people's comments. Our President Xi Jinping has said, the people's aspiration for a better life is our working target. If the people are happy with what we are doing, so we are happy. If not, then we'll rethink what we have been doing. So we attach importance not to, as what you You have said the West or East critics. We don't. We care what the Chinese people are saying. The other countries' people are saying about what we are doing. So I like the words of your national anthems authors, from Mr. Franz Pruseren, the words. He's a great poet of Slovenia, the poet I like the best. He wrote to the effect that God's blessing on all nations who long and work for the bright day, the day when all men are free and when no war, no strife shall have its way. That is good. And Hulava. So really, this is what we are working for. We are working for the people of China, and for the people of the rest of the world. Therefore, we are ready to listen to other people's comments on what we have been doing. And we are also ready to learn all the good points, the good things.
What are the good points and good things?
For example, we have our friend from the Netherlands. We are sitting together just now and we're whispering. I'm sorry, we didn't tell you that when you were chairing the meeting, we were having small discussions between ourselves. We will, New China, we'll never forget when some Western powers tried to contain China, and we didn't have a special flight to take our to take our first Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister Zhou Enlai to visit Africa. We had to borrow a special plane from the Netherlands. We'll never forget the help given to New China by our Dutch friends. That's good. That's very kind. When some Western big powers try to contain China, New China, our Dutch friends were so kind to us. You know, you might forget, but in China, we will never forget. You saw the Dutch friends who offered to lend us a plane to take our Prime Minister Zhou Enlai to visit the neighboring countries. India friends. In China, we will never forget that it's the Indian people who invented the mathematical figures, 1, 2, 3, 4. We call it Arab figures. But we know that was an invention by the Indian people. China is now having many mathematicians. But without the invention of the Indian people long ago, how could we have a new technology? How could we have some worldwide famous mathematicians? And politically, as of the date of July the 7th, 1937, when the Japanese fascists then started this all-scale aggressive war against China, we will never forget. There was an Indian scholar, Indian writer, Indian poet, Indian playwright in the name of Tagore, who stood up to speak for China, condemning the Japanese fascists on its aggression against China. How can we forget that? And that man, when he spoke for China, was already 76 years old. And the man who was also the first Asian who won Nobel Prize Literature Prize. And he was also the holder, up to today, I'm afraid, the championship, who is now still the author of both music and words of 2 independent countries' national anthems. So we have a lot to learn from our Indian friends and from Sri Lanka. We will never forget, when New China was born on October the 1st, 1949, some big powers in the West, to quote you, tried to kill this new baby, the new independent China. And we could not even get rubber to develop our industry. It was Sri Lanka which offered us gold rubber to have a new China. So indeed, we have a lot to learn from all the good things of all countries, all civilizations in the world. Therefore, I'm so happy to be in this strategic forum. This is another good opportunity for me to learn, such as to learn from our host country, Slovenia. This is my third visit. My first visit was in the year 30 years ago. I was astonished by the beauty of Slovenia. I wondered, looking around the beautiful lakes, the beautiful rivers, and the green mountains, I wondered, why? Is this true? In my motherland, the twin beautiful cities, Suzhou and Hangzhou, we call them paradise on earth. But in Slovenia, I found this is really the paradise on earth.
Thank you, thank you.
Indeed.
Thank you, Mr.
So we have to learn from your efforts and experience in protecting your ecosystem and the environment. So we still have a lot to learn. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Singh, do you want to continue? Want to say something? Want to add something to Mr. Lee's? Do you want to add something to Mr. Lee's?
No, I think what he said is there's a great truism in it that if you want development, if you want to take your nations forward, you need to take good points from everybody. If you are only going to think that you are the fountainhead of knowledge, I think you will go wrong. So it is true not only for individuals, it is also true for nations. You need to take better things from everybody. You need to be a leader who can distinguish what is needed for your country and what is not needed for your country, what is needed for your political system, what is not needed for your political system. And a good leader is the one who, over a period of time, see, when you remain in, and now I'm speaking from 42 years of experience in the army. When you, over a period of time, when you lead people, one thing which a leader develops, and that is gut feeling. It is not mentioned in any leadership theory, but it is a quality which tells you this will succeed or this will not succeed. And a good leader will only pick up those things which will succeed.
Gut feeling then. Mr. Navracic, this question will be for all of you gentlemen. I'm just wondering, okay, we've heard today, good leader listens, good leader shapes the opinion, good leader serves to the people. What are the qualities of a good leader today? Today, you said gut feeling. What else? What, Mr. Navracic, what would you like to add to this?
To be purposeful and determined, I think. And he or she has to be sensitive, because in a mass democracy, although a leader must lead the voters, must lead the community, but on the other hand, he or she has to secure his or her background, electoral background, because it is a pretty frequent situation in a democracy that a leader must do something, but this is not the most difficult part of the situation. The most difficult part is to secure a re-election after having done what was a must.
So in the first mandate, every leader just tries to secure the second election, and then in the second mandate, he tries to...
It's a temptation,
yes.
yeah, but it's the other side
yes.
of the story.
But
you have to find the balance, I think.
Is that the reality or not?
it can be a reality if, but I think these days it would be a very careless behavior because all the leaders feel the need for a change, at least in Europe. And the real task is to find the balance between the change and popularity, because that's the tricky.
Mr. Peris, the qualities of a good leader today.
Well, I think a good leader must necessarily have certain qualities. One is a good leader must be able to delegate. You mustn't try to do everything yourself. I think that's important. And then in doing so, find the right people, because leadership in the contemporary world is a team effort. So you have to allocate particular tasks to people with particular skills and aptitudes. And you must have acumen, you must have discrimination in choosing people for specific tasks. Without it, I don't think it is possible to run such a complex exercise as a modern government. Also, I think a leader has to have the courage, where necessary, to swim against the current, to be able to inspire people to think in new ways and to challenge traditional beliefs or values. And sometimes when there is a dramatic transformation, this requires considerable imagination on the part of the leader. I mean, if I take my own country as an example, there was a conflict, there was a polarization. Today, that is happily behind us. So the priorities are different. When the priorities are different, a leader has to guide his people to think in a new way that is appropriate for the imperatives and the demands of the current situation. In our country, the current situation requires everybody coming together, unity, solidarity, a deep understanding that to move forward, we must bury our differences, leave behind us the discord, the divergences of the past. In other words, to find the highest common denominator, whatever the vast mass of the people of the country would be able to identify with. Now, this requires a total change, and the leader has to be able to carry the public with him. So he must have a certain inspirational quality, and of course, a practical program of action. Idealism alone will not help. So I think leadership is a combination of all these qualities, and also a sense of humility to be able to admit that one may have been wrong and to be able to start all over again, if necessary.
Gentlemen, you're all speaking about political leaders, but I'm wondering whether those are really the real leaders today. You're the special envoy for the Dutch government for the cyberspace conference, and I'm just wondering whether with the rise of cyberspace, the real leaders are not really the leaders of China or United States or European Union or India or Sri Lanka, but maybe the leaders, the people on the leading positions of Google, Amazon, eBay, Alibaba Group in China, with people like who have information. Let me mention the National Security Agency, whatever. I mean, the information today is very important. So who are really today's leaders? And if I might add, 20 years ago, if we were doing the same panel, there would be not so much, tweeting going on, I would say. We hear all the time the mobile phones, everybody is trying to listen to us and then using the mobile phones. So today's world is very different from the world 10, 20 years ago. So who are the real leaders today?
Well, allow me to make one very short comment on good leadership as such. I'm very convinced that one of the most important characteristics of a good leader is to beware of being surrounded by so-called yes men. And a good leader is a leader who is willing, and I follow suit on what the Minister of Sri Lanka is saying, a good leader is a sort of guy or woman, also woman, who is willing to have in his or her inner circle, those people who are strong instead of weak. And that is something we have to take into serious consideration. If you don't follow up on that sort of maxim, you end up with what is called groupthink. And you end up with misery and tragedy, sooner or later. Well, now, on your question about the cyberspace and the developments in the world, let me stick to the fact that what we are talking here about is, of course, a trend in the world where the internet, the coverage of the internet, you know, it is by now about 90% of the population is on the internet one way or the other, or on mobile phone. There, of course, you see tremendous shifts in power and in influence. And for that matter, it is of the greatest importance that we stick to the notion of what we call the multi-stakeholders model, which means that the internet is of us all, is of all of us, and it means not only of the government, but also of those private sector institutions and organizations, and also not to forget non-governmental organizations. And there again, you know, I'm on the Aristotelian side of checks and balances. Of course, when we look at the present developments, you might say that the big 5 or 7 in the internet world are of a tremendous power to exert. But for them too, it's a matter of talking about leadership and moral leadership and the philosophy of leadership. It's a matter for them too of what we call corporate responsibility and socially responsible behavior. And there, of course, we have to end up with the notion that after all, the internet, it's actually the same story as about political leadership. The internet is of all of us, the people at large in the world, and not of those who are pulling the strings from a certain kind of position of power. I defend the notion of the multi-stakeholders model, which says that it's not just states, sovereign states, it's not just multinational corporations, Facebook, Google, Amazon. It's not just non-governmental organizations, but it is a matter of us all to see for the prospects and the enormous possibilities of what is going on in the cyberspace. If I look at the developing countries, where you see a tremendous explosion of the coverage of internet and also mobile phone communication, if I look there and I look at the grandiose possibilities in the cyberspace of what we call e-education and e-health, I've seen it in India. I've seen it in the Philippines a couple of months ago. We are really up to something great, but then we should understand that it's of us all and not of a few, not of the happy few. Thank you.
Mr. Lee, so who are the real leaders today? Political leadership is still the most important one, or maybe economic leadership is taking over?
To answer your question, let me begin by quoting my leader, a man I always highly respect, the designer of China's opening up and Reform Policy, Mr. Deng Xiaoping, who once talked about the job of China's civil servants, and he said something to the effect that to exercise leadership is to serve the people, to do good things for the people. And I believe this is really a very good definition of good leadership. Just a moment. And then, if you want to be a good leader, you have to treat others as equals. Be free of pride and prejudice. The title of a book written by British lady author, Jane Austen. You have to be free of pride and prejudice. When representing the country, really you have to treat other countries as equals. And when exercising leadership at home, be humble, be modest to the ordinary people and even to your subordinates. And thirdly, to be a good leader, according to my experience, you have to learn from a people lower in ranking than you, younger than you. In recent years, my wife and I have been promoted to grandmother and grandfather. I've certainly discovered that the older I grow, the more ignorant I've become. Now, our granddaughter of 3.5 can handle iPhone pretty well, but I cannot. So I really found that we have to learn from younger people. If you are a good leader, indeed, you would sincerely learn from people lower in ranking and younger than age. Among all the countries that I've had, we have to modestly learn from other countries' strong points and good qualities. Thank you.
Mr. Paris, the leaders of today,
Yes.
political, economic, they have to handle the smartphones well. They have to tweet. Do they have to tweet? Is it necessary for a good leader to tweet or not?
I don't think it's just political, economic, or economic. What about the media? Today, the media wields enormous influence. The traditional media as well as the social media. And I think at a seminar like this, a BLED seminar, something that we ought to address is, okay, the power is there. Today, media moguls are probably every bit as powerful as leaders of countries. But reference was made to Aristotle and checks and balances and accountability. There's a lot of talk about accountability of politicians. Politicians, after all, are elected by the people. There are periodic elections, there are the courts. So there is an established system of restraints, restraints on the arbitrary exercise of public power, right? But are there similar checks and balances, limitations on the media, for example? Not at all. So why is accountability thought to be a concept that is exclusively relevant to politicians and to leaders of government? I think one of our principal tasks today is to give some thought to practical ways of enforcing and implementing accountability in relation to other sectors where equal amounts of power are actually wielded. And the impact on the community is no less. This is true of multinational corporations. The bigger multinational corporations probably have more power than the leaders of most countries. What are the checks and balances operative there? What about NGOs, non-governmental organizations? Of course, they are part and parcel of civil society. You need those as ingredients of a vibrant democratic society. But in some of our countries, certainly in our part of the world, we have found that on the eve of big elections, for example, there are vast sums of foreign exchange that come into the country. And then when the question is asked, what is all this money going to be used for? The answer is, we are going to do capacity building. What does that mean? Then, in many cases, it has been found that this avalanche of money descending at very critical moments in a country's political history does represent an improper intervention in the domestic affairs of that country. So what are the checks and balances? Nobody is suggesting that this activity must be suppressed. But I mean, all power, if it is untrammeled, is bad. Mm-hmm. And we are too focused on government in that context. I think that there is a certain gap, a certain lacuna in our thinking. And in the modern world, where there are entities which are just as powerful as governments, probably more so, I think the kinds of intuitive restrictions which we identify with democracy must be thought through with far greater care in their application to other institutions, media, non-governmental organizations, and the corporate sector in particular.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Singh, so this is the subject I would like to continue. So how to introduce this checks and balances system to the behind-the-scene power, the power in the shadow, the economic multi-organization, the NGOs, everything that's behind the doors. So how do you introduce this checks and balances system?
See, first thing that we must understand is that what you said earlier, and I'll just take a minute on that. What you talked of cyberspace and all the information that is available, these are resources and tools available to a leader to utilize in what he wants to push across. These have an influence, and if a leader utilizes them properly, he can propagate what he wants for the betterment of people. If he doesn't utilize them properly, it works in a negative manner. Now, when we look at the economic field and other fields, today the world gets stability if both political and economic systems in a country are balanced. If they are not balanced, you will have instability. And therefore, a leader must be able to strike that right balance and create the necessary checks which are able to ensure that both these fields grow in a manner in which you can reap the benefit. Anything that you do in a country as a leader, the system must be inclusive. The moment you have an extractive system, it breeds a great amount of discrimination, it breeds a great amount of dissonance, it creates situation which is not conducive for growth of that country. And therefore, whatever policies that you make, and a good leader will be able to discern what is inclusive and what is good for the people. And it is this criteria alone, along with the commitment of the leader to go on this path, that will prove how successful he is as a leader.
Mr. Navracic, the checks and balances behind the closed doors and in the shadow power in Europe, does that work? How is the situation in Europe?
Well, you mean
Be
at European
critical.
level?
Yes, be critical. Be honest and open.
I'm not there to be critical, but the institutional scheme of the European Union at European level is a mess, because of course we talk about European Parliament as a parliament, as a national parliament. We talk about the European Commission as a government, as European government.
Is it? Do you feel it is already the government?
No, that's the essence of the mess. That the European Parliament lacks a lot of powers in legislation, which would enable the European Parliament to be a real parliament, a legislation. On the other hand, the European Commission is not a government per se at European level. So the checks and balances, as for the checks and balances, there are some elements of the checks and balances. Well, the checks and balances is an institutional legitimacy for the leadership. It's not about popular vote. It is about the institutional balance and mutual accountability of the institutions. There are elements of the checks and balances at European level. For instance, the inauguration voting or non-confidence voting of the European Union to the European Commission, the newly formed European Commission. This is an element of the checks and balances. But broadly viewing, I would say that there are no constitutional system of checks and balances at European level yet.
I would like to approach another subject, that's the role of United Nations in the world. And I'm just wondering, my question would be very simple, is Mr. Ban Ki-moon really a world leader or just a bureaucrat with a fancy title? Mr. Rosenthal.
This is I couldn't imagine a more offensive question, actually. I like Mr. Ban Ki-moon a lot. I think he's doing a formidable job, but within a system which is not up to the circumstances of today and the developments of tomorrow. When you talked in an earlier phase of our discussion about Europe and then Asia, I was thinking about the need for a redistribution of the power in the international institutions, including the United Nations. One of our problems is that when we look at the Security Council in the United Nations, it is a remnant of 1945. We're now living 2014, 2015. I'm a strong supporter, I have said it when I was a Minister of Foreign Affairs, I've said it in the General Assembly. The Dutch government is a strong supporter of a recomposition of the Security Council to the extent that it will give a proper place to emerging powers like India, etc. I should admit, without a veto power, but they should be part of the permanent membership of the United Nations. The same sort of reasoning counts for the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and what have you. And it's quite interesting, if I may add to that, that a famous Singaporese diplomat and scholar, Mahbubani, was at first talking about taking over the power from the West. We will do it on our part. By now he's talking about sharing of power. And that is what it is all about, including in the United Nations.
Mr. Singh, do you agree? The sharing
See, I
of power.
said some time back I used the word being inclusive. And like Mr. Lee said about the Charter of the UN, it's a charter that was framed at a particular time with certain aims. Now we need to reassess whether that charter still stands today the way it should. And that is why probably when you say, is the Secretary General doing the job as a leader
Yes.
or as a bureaucrat? Because you have given him a dish which has got A, B and C in it. It is not the dish that he has conceived or he has created. So if we want UN to be more functional, it must become more inclusive of the realities of today. Nothing can remain stagnant in a system like this. The moment you are stagnant, then it will die. And therefore, if we want to ensure that the effectiveness of the UN remains, and whomsoever we choose as the head of the UN to take things forward in a manner in which probably everybody wants, then necessary structural changes will be required in it.
Mr. Paris?
Well, I think it's, perhaps the question is slightly unfair because it's not as though the Secretary General of the UN can, according to his own vision and his own priorities, arrange matters and produce results. He's hamstrung in so many different ways. But I think we need to be conscious of something else. When the whole UN system is not backed up by the kind of sanctions that are aspects of a local legal system. You know, say the law in Slovenia or in India or Sri Lanka, wherever, I mean, you have the courts, you have the police, you have the prisons, you know, all of this is available. In the international sphere, you don't have any of that. So what then is the ultimate sanction? The ultimate sanction is moral legitimacy. I think one of the great crises today is a total erosion of that moral legitimacy. And that is because, at the very least, if there is to be fairness and equity, you must have norms which are applicable across the board, consistency. You know, you can't have one rule for one situation and a totally different rule for a different situation, depending on the actors. But it doesn't require any profound study of situations today to come to the conclusion that there is absolutely no consistency whatsoever, even at the basic level.
How to change that?
Well, there must be, first of all, one must recognize the gravity of the problem. And there has to be a collective effort on the part of all concerned to address it. And today, I don't think it is unfair to say that human rights has become a political tool. And the most horrendous situations which involve carnage and the flagrant abuse of human rights, often nothing is done because there are other considerations, economic considerations, strategic considerations, geopolitical considerations, which militate against action. So those go by default. Nobody does anything about it. So if you're highly selective, highly subjective, then you have the very foundations of the international order being subject to a great deal of cynicism, skepticism. Nobody believes in it. So that results in disintegration of the, I think today this is a real problem. If I might just add an episodic comment to buttress that. I attended the human rights segment, the high-level segment of the Human Rights Council in March. When my own country came in for comment from various quarters, and the foreign minister of a very big country who was not known to be traditionally supportive of Sri Lanka, he was sitting next to me, and at a certain point in the proceedings, he spontaneously made the comment. He said, look at this, look at all the mayhem in the world, all the death and destruction, and here we are sitting and engaging in a historical inquiry into Sri Lanka. And then this was the telling comment, he said, I sometimes wonder whether we are living in the same planet. You know, so this was, you know, a total lack of balance and proportion. What is it that, we have limited time, whether in Geneva, in New York, or wherever. So we have to use that time to address problems that really matter. Are we doing that? Are we making the right choices? And are we dealing with these situations with a modicum of equity that would appeal to the intuitive sense of justice of people up and down the world? I think that's something we need to focus on.
Mr. Lee, the reform of United Nations organization, how do you see it? How this organization should reform?
Good, thank you. This is talking about my old profession. I worked in the UN for about 3 years. I enjoyed my work there because I have made so many friends from all over the world, including Slovenia's permanent representative in the UN. Well, to begin with, I need to confess, Mr. Pan Jumeng is a personal friend of mine. So in commenting about him, I have to be very careful and objective. Having said that, I believe it's fair to say he's a good General Secretary of the UN. He has done many good things in addressing.
What would you underline?
I want to underline that he's a good secretary, general secretary. He works very well for world peace and for encouraging common development. Well, take for example, he has just left China after attending the World Young People's Olympic Games in Nanking. Well, this is of course a good occasion for him to enjoy himself a little bit. But I want to stress that when China met with natural disasters, such as in 2008, well, there was an earthquake in southwest China. He, as Secretary General of the UN, went to the disaster spot to express the UN sympathy for the Chinese people suffering from the earthquake. I was touched. This was good. I was also touched by his appearance very often in Africa, in some disaster-affected areas. This has won admiration from me for him. Well, about the reform, this is a sensitive issue, but let me say very sincerely that the UN does need reform, and so does its Security Council. The key matter, I believe, is to let the developing countries, smaller countries, have bigger voices in the UN and its Security Council, and also to emphasize that the UN Charter principles should be abided by. If a country, no matter how economically strong or how arrogantly its politicians are, if they are still worshipping World War II Class A criminals, if they still are dreaming of becoming a superpower, enjoying hegemonism, I don't think they are entitled to have a bigger say in the UN. This is my words from my heart, simply because the UN is built on the ruins of World War II. Or in other words, the UN was set up in 1945 on remains of more than 60 million people killed in the war. And the leading purpose of the UN is to prevent another similar aggressive war from breaking out. And the purpose is to protect basic human rights of all the people in the world. So we must abide by these principles in discussing reforms about the UN and its Security Council. China will, of course, go on working on its historic choice to walk on the peaceful development road. And by developing ourselves, we want to join hands with other countries to develop, to maintain world peace and encourage common development. This is China's standard position. No matter what certain politicians try to distort China's position, this is the simple fact. We are happy that we have so many friends in the world who understand China's position and who are ready to work with China in maintaining peace and in encouraging common prosperity. I thank you.
Thank you. We started with the divided Europe. Mr. Navracic, Europe is not again united about the reform of the United Nations. So, and then we'll take some questions from the audience.
Should we have to be united? I mean,
would that make Europe stronger or not?
I don't know. Because it's up to the legitimacy. If there is no legitimacy for the institutions at community level, it would be weaker if we push the European integration into forming new institutions at community level with no legitimacy from the citizens. And I see that at this level of the of the European cooperation, there is a too wide gap between the European level and the citizens. So I doubt if it would make Europe stronger if it would be more united, because there is no popular consent behind the unification, behind the uniform structure, and behind a new monolithic power structure at European level.
Thank you. I propose we take some questions from the audience. Please, we have somebody, I think it's going to hand out. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Michele Ozzan, UCHAM, European Chamber. Last year, in this room, we spoke about the United States of Europe. The president of Slovenia introduced the concept. And we businesses say that we are already working towards the United States of Europe. Because we're working all across 50 countries, yes, 50 countries in Europe. And NGO, third sector, is working even better across the continent. And these categories are building something like the United States of Europe. But there's somebody who is lagging behind. There are some politicians across Europe that are selling their soul in exchange for some votes at home. Illuminated leaders is what we need. Illuminated leaders will be famous. National populists will be infamous. So my question to the panel is, who are those illuminated leaders who are building a nice, good, prosperous, healthy, safe, and peaceful Europe? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Navracic, would you like to continue? Who are the leaders?
Yes, as I see in Slovenia, mocking politicians as such as popular as in Hungary. But I would say that the best politicians are, of course, who are striving for a more prosperous Europe. But politics in itself and the essence of being a politician is to listen to the citizens as well. Because, yes, there are a lot of people who support federal Europe. But there are, on the other hand, a lot of people who are against a united Europe or a federal Europe. And we have to go forward with the support of both camps. I mean, we have to time by time, good solutions, good compromises, which can lead to a more prosperous Europe, but don't lag behind the people who are distrustful in a higher level of institutions, or how to say, a more remote level of institutions. We have to convince them, and we have to integrate different groups and subgroups of people, and it's not as easy as it seems sometimes.
Mr. Rosenthal, do you want to add something?
Well, I would say we have 28 member states of the European Union, and a great advantage and asset of the European Union actually is the ingrained and inherent diversity. And all these countries have their own history, their own culture, their own outlook, their own political and social and economic structures and institutions and interests and concerns, and you can't do it away with the Fata Morgana of a United States of Europe. We are talking different languages, completely different from the United States, for instance, of the United States of America. And here again, you know, we are talking about checks and balances. And let me not be misunderstood. When I talk about checks and balances, it is also the balance between resolve and doing what is needed, on the one hand, together and as quick as possible, and on the other hand, accepting the need for compromise, sometimes a little bit protracted decision-making. It is as it is. And I would say that when I look at the side of resolve, I would say that, for instance, if we talk about the human rights, which is one of the basic elements of the European Union, then, of course, I would strongly favor a very strong and common position and common stance of the countries of the European Union on that particular platform. And the more so because if we want to be heard in the world in the context of the defending of human rights, each and every country by itself on the part of the European Union is not in the position really to make a strong fist. But if it is the European Union at large, it has something to say. I remember very well when I was a Minister of Foreign Affairs that we were talking about the awful situation in Syria. It's already 3 years ago. And then, of course, we understood together that if each and every country would go for a strong position on the human rights situation in Syria, but also in other countries, it would not get it would not exert any influence. But at the European level, doing it together, it really would mean something. Listing persons, you know, not to be allowed to your territory, Hungary or the Netherlands, we are small countries. It doesn't make any impact on those guys who are offending the human rights. But if you forbid people from outside the European Union to enter the European territory at large, it may mean something. So in that sense, I'm both on the moral side and on the practical side.
Would you like to add something, gentlemen? We're talking about the United States of Europe. How does that sound in Beijing or in
Well, the first question from among the audience is really of a pretty subtle and profound nature. And I thank the gentleman who asked this question for you helped me to all of a sudden remember two sayings. One Chinese ancient saying, a good friend is a friend in need. And also a saying by an Indian or Bangladesh scholar, I forgot which, to the effect that, well, a good friend, a true friend is one who lends you an umbrella when raining. Not so good a friend or a false friend is one who will lend you an umbrella in a fine day. And when it rains, it takes it back. Well, I believe about the European Union, when you suffer the euro debt crisis, we in China feel the same way you people in Europe do. China is still a developing country, or in other words, a pretty poor country in per capita GDP terms. For example, our per capita GDP last year perhaps is only about a quarter of that of Slovenia. Slovenia is the youngest developed nation according to the World Bank, so far as I know. Still, we tried our best to help our European friends address the difficulties created by the euro crisis. We tried our best. And when China had the difficulties, some good European friends really tried their best to help us. For example, France, under the leadership of General de Gaulle, was the first big Western country to recognize New China as early as on the 27th January 1964. An example is Slovenia. Only a few months after declaring independence, Slovenia decided to recognize New China and to recognize that Taiwan is one part of China. So we thank you for that. This is, I think, what this question has reminded me of. Thank you.
Mr. Perez, please.
Well, I think the basic point there is the need for a sense of balance. I mean, the 28 countries came together in order to benefit collectively, to make Europe stronger. But today we see in many European countries, in the United Kingdom, in France, in Austria, there are political parties which are gaining ground, which are increasing their popularity, and they are canvassing public opinion on the platform of nationalism. As we are going too far, we are surrendering too much power to Brussels. And in the process, we are putting in jeopardy our national right to make decisions in relation to our own people. Now, that point of view seems to have an appeal, because recent election results in many European countries do seem to indicate a degree of disenchantment, disillusionment with the growing power of the Brussels bureaucracy. So the employment in the relevant countries, particularly protection for agriculture and so on, makes one wonder whether the right balance is being struck and whether we are neglecting to some extent national feelings in those countries, and whether some remedial action is not appropriate at this time to deal with that trend, because it does seem to be quite manifest across the board.
Mr. Singh?
I would support two things. One, there is a need for multipolarity in the world. That can only come if you have a strong European Union. A union that is able to assert itself when the time comes, which means that you have got to manage diversity amongst the 28 states, which means you have to do a greater amount of consensus building, and which means that you have to ensure that the political nationalism of each country has its own place, yet when it comes to speaking as European Union, everybody is able to chip in. And I won't say that it is United States of Europe, but I would say that, yes, European Union needs to become stronger, and there's a great amount that is needed by each country. It cannot be just left to one or two to say, okay, we will do A, B, and C. It doesn't happen that way. I think there's a greater amount of consensus building that is needed.
Thank you. Another question from the audience, please. Gentleman in the first row. Thank you.
I'm Deep Kapuria. I represent CII, Confederation of Indian Industries. I've come here for the first time to this beautiful country. Love the topic, and while the addressal of talking about various philosophies, starting from Socrates to Plato to Aristotle, coming down to the Chinese philosophers and the Indian philosophers, and each one of them advocate to look at, the leader needs to look at important things before they look at the urgent ones. But like you rightly pointed out, in today's world of Twitter, it's instant gratification. So when you're looking at instant gratification versus long-term important gains, I think that challenge has not emerged very well in the discussion. So I would really like to hear about what the leadership should do. We struggle with it in our companies. I run a corporate, fairly large corporate. And that's an issue always. What's to be done for instant gratification? Because anybody who wants to talk about, a pay raise, that should be done instantly. He can't wait for the performance to happen and then, get something done down the road.
Long-term solutions then.
Yes. So the differentiation between instant gratification and the importance of getting that gain long term, and how do the leadership philosophy address it as of the day?
Thank you very much for this question. Gentlemen, so instant gratification or long-term solutions, please. Who would like to?
There's a contradiction in the political logic of democracy, because of course a statesman brings long-term decisions which can affect in long-term perspective and makes a nation happy in long term. But at the same time, a statesman have to think about the next elections, which is in a short term. So it's a multidimensional decision making. I think, of course, the optimal decision is where short term and long term objectives and elements are coincide, but unfortunately this is a very rare occasion.
But isn't it, leadership involves a vision. Leadership involves a vision, and surely the vision has to incorporate both elements, instant gratification as well as the long term. You can't tell your child, when the time comes, I will provide a lovely house for you, but in the meantime, I can't provide you with shoes and socks to go to school. So you have to combine the two in a practical way. I think a leader must have a long-term vision for his country. But at the same time, he has to provide the people with things that they require for their immediate use, for their immediate benefit. So it's not a question of choosing one against the other, but deciding how best you can marry the two in an internally consistent set of policies in order to keep the people happy, keep them contented, and at the same time move them forward with their consent and understanding towards a common goal which will involve benefit to the country over a sustained time frame.
That's why in some countries difficult reforms are just being pushed forward, because nobody wants to tackle them, because that means that they would lose the elections. Would you want to add something? Mr. Singh?
See, I would say that although instant gratification is what everybody looks for, but as a leader, you should be discerning enough to ensure that your long-term vision, your long-term aim, the path on which you want to put the political process on, or the corporate progress on, does not get jeopardized by only looking at those small little things which will be called instant gratification. You have to discern what you want in the overall interest of any organization. So far as your decisions are peppered with that overall interest, few things which will be a result of this, which can be given out as instant gratification, can be done. But otherwise, if your intentions are clear to the people in your organization, I don't think after some time they'll look for instant gratification.
Mr. Lee?
Well, I want to reveal to all of you, my friends, one personal record. That is, Europe is the only continent of which all the countries I have visited. So I have friends and teachers in all the European countries. And among other things, my discovery is that Europe is the best developed and the most wealthy continent. So I hope Europe and the European Union can do more pragmatic things to help the less developed and even chaotic countries, such as Iraq. I mentioned Iraq simply because when I was a child, I liked reading Greek legends. And I still remember one legend or one fable, that is, the name of the continent, Europe, used to be, or originally, was the name of a beautiful Iraqi girl. Then, simply because Jews fell in love with that Iraqi girl, she named Europe, Europe. So I think Europe has more reason to help Iraq, well, enjoy peace again, and help the Iraqi kids who have no school to go to and who don't even have enough to eat, enjoy a better life. This is my personal suggestion. Thank you.
Mr. Rosenthal.
Let me say, thanks for the incisive question about instant gratification and the situation we are in. I try to look always in my country, for instance, at the basic characteristics and features of our political system. And it is my strong conviction that we would have a little bit less instant gratification if, for instance, members of parliament who would do well in their for 4 years would have a reasonable chance of being re-elected in the list system the next time, and not being totally subject to lists on how much media coverage they have had throughout these 4 years. It might also be of some help if, for instance, in some countries, one would consider the pros and cons of having a fixed term for a government. I'm hesitant about it because looking at, for instance, the United Kingdom, where there is this fixed term, it isn't of much help. On the other hand, a country where the political leaders, the political incumbents, have to be aware of the fact that they can be voted down and out every single day, you know, that does mean something. I strongly endorse the position taken by our Sri Lankan colleague on the importance of looking also at the media and the way in which the media are behaving responsibly or not in the political system. That is also part of the equation. Thank you.
We'll just take the last question from the audience, please. Gentleman there.
Zlatko Šalić from the University of Ljubljana, Slovenia. We have heard quite a lot about global challenges in terms of, well, the new philosophy of leadership. I would say we've been actually talking about this for 20 years now. I'm a teacher, I talk to my students for, as I said, past 2 decades, that a lot of tectonic changes have been going on. And actually from the panel we see maybe 20 years ago, we would have a gentleman from the United States sitting here, and there's no one from the United States, which tells us something, I would say. But clearly, at the global level, we definitely see some changes, and something that would definitely require a lot of leadership. In terms of, well, India has been mentioned as a potential member of the Security Council. And I think we have heard a lot about that. But one thing that hasn't been touched at the panel, I think, was the question of regional leadership. It is clear that if we want to have some sense of global leadership, regions have to be dealt first. And here we have a lot of unopened questions. On the one hand, obviously, we see the developments. China, obviously, has something to say about regional leadership, India as well, Europe for sure, as we see nowadays, and obviously Russia and the Russian Federation, United States as well. So for me personally, talking about global changes, I think regional leadership is the one that has to be dealt with first. And I think, crucially, also from the facts, from the things that we haven't discussed so far, and again, also because there are so many complexities involved here, but clearly for businesses, for young people have been often mentioned here. All those segments would, I would argue, come down to the fact to the question how the regional leadership is being or is going to be dealt with. As we can see, at least in our neighborhood, that unanswered question also costs lives. Thank you.
Regional leadership. Who would like to? Mr. Perez?
Yes, I think that's a good place to start. If you take South Asia, for example, we have SAARC, which consists of 8 countries. And recently, the leaders of the SAARC countries have identified 3 priorities for regional leadership: counterterrorism, energy security, and food security. So if the subcontinent is able to pool its resources in a practical way, then I think the threshold of prosperity for all would rise significantly with very beneficial implications for livelihoods, for employment. Reference was made to young people. That would certainly help. And there's every indication that there is a sharp focus today on strengthening some of the instruments that are available for this purpose. For example, the South Asia Free Trade Agreement, SAFTA. The volumes of intra-regional trade are very low, but there seems to be a collective resolve on the part of all our countries to address those issues, to fill the gaps, and to move forward. There's also the growing feeling, certainly in South Asia, that we must move beyond purely regional issues, and that it may be useful to try to develop a collective position on issues that transcend the subcontinent. The new leadership of India has articulated this, and we have indicated our very strong support for it. So if we are able to develop the region, it's a huge region. It is home to a very considerable swath of humanity. Some of the building blocks are already in place, but we need to invigorate and strengthen the trade and other instruments in order to move forward. There's also people-to-people contact to be thought about, linkages among chambers of commerce, among universities, among professions, parliaments in the region, a whole reservoir of resources which can be exploited for the benefit of the region as a whole.
Mr. Singh?
Yeah, I would support Ms. Perez for one great reason, that regionalism and regional leadership will emanate because today, just like European Union, it's economics which is dividing people or driving people together. It is also ensuring that you are able to, in a region, utilize the strengths of your resources, your commerce, your trade, for not only betterment of the region, because there is a lot available there, but also to project your leadership in ensuring that region's voice is heard. And there are regions which have, over a period of time, historically, for some reason or the other, they have lagged behind in the global forums where the voice is not as heard. So if you want to attain the type of synergy, if you want to attain the type of voice, if you want to ensure that the region prospers and you as a region are able to make a difference in the global state of affairs, then yes, regional leadership has to emerge.
Mr. Rosenthal?
Thanks for the question. And when I hear the story from the southeastern region, I would say that for us on the European end, we should simply be as strong as possible on getting the inner market to its fullest extent, which means, for instance, that when it is about the way in which services are being provided, we have a lot to do up till even for the coming years to get where we want to be. Another point I would like to raise is, and a little bit by analogy to the story from Southeast Asia, I would like to draw the attention to the fact that not everything is being set forth in the what we could call the first order political arena. And there I would like to draw the attention of the audience to, for instance, the very important progress which the European Union has made over the years in really building up a European realm for research and development and innovation. And I think that one of the big assets for the years to come for the new Commission too will be its Horizon 2020 program, which is about some 80 billion euros, and where we have exactly the kinds of priorities which our colleague from Sri Lanka is talking about. We call them the grand challenges. And that is, of course, what Europe should take seriously. And there I'm not talking immediately politics, but I'm talking about matters which are of importance to the people in Europe. And that is that we should try to do our utmost to defend our position and to strengthen our position in the rat race worldwide in research, development and innovation. And by the way, there, of course, we are not in the mode today of preserving things for ourselves, but it is all about open innovation on the global scale and sharing our knowledge with other parts of the world.
Mr. Navracic, and also I would like to add you are a keen supporter of Visegrad Group. Would you like it to enlarge, to become bigger?
Yeah, we've been funders and members of the Visegrad 4 cooperation, or V4 cooperation. I think it is one of the most successful regional integration in contemporary Europe or over the world. It lifted us into the NATO and the EU, which are again regional integrations. And I think that's the following step is that we have to enlarge the V4 cooperation, and we have to extend the V4 cooperation onto Slovenia and probably Croatia, because we have very positive experiences in cooperating with the other Central European countries. It makes us stronger, really, in the EU, in NATO, or on the international scene. And I think we have to keep the doors open to our Slovenian friends as well.
Mr. Lee?
Well, thank you very much for giving me another chance to speak. Well, as a former diplomat, a former rural child, and a current retired urban old guy, on this question from the young gentleman, I just want to reaffirm humbly and proudly that my country, China, will never seek hegemony or will never seek international or regional so-called leadership. We want to be just a friendly neighbor of our neighboring countries and a true and constructive partner of all the countries all over the world. And my country has a good transition. That is, we are true to our words. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you for your thoughts for this debate. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. Spoštovane gledalci in gledalke televizije Slovenija, hvala za vašo pozornost in nasvidenje. Goodbye.